What's up, you guys? This is Devin from CenturyFX Studios, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about how to get the best settings out of your camera. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, this is just clickbait, because there's no way in the world this dude can tell me how to get the best settings for my camera. And yes, you're right to a certain extent. Now, if you've seen any of the newer cameras, especially the bigger cameras, the DSLRs, the professional cameras, the ones that cost over $1,000, especially the ones that are right in the $1,000, $2,000 range, all of these cameras are almost exactly the same. They function off of the same principles, which essentially is the exposure triangle. You have your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO, the three main veins of the camera that tell you exactly how your exposure is going to come out or guide you into making the right choices when it comes to exposure. Tells you what the camera's thinking, what it's doing, and then you can use your LCD screens, your EVLs, and basically you can actually measure out your exposure with these three settings, and that's, I would say, 95% of the image that you produce at the end of the day. So these three settings are going to help me tell you guys what's the best situational settings based off of what situation you're in and what you're thinking in your mind. Thinking in your mind's eye, as a famous photographer once told me. But let's get into it. And of course, like I told you, I can't tell you exactly what your setting is going to be like, but I can tell you you need to study your environments. Study exactly what you're going into. If it's a birthday party, if you're going to be inside and outside, study the inside exposure, study outside exposure, study the weather if you're going outside. Make sure it's not raining, and if it's raining, know what to do. Know when to take pictures if you have to take pictures outside. Know when exactly to go out and understand what the sun is doing, because the sun is the majesty, the biggest light source of all, the biggest light source, if you know how to use it. So you have to understand how to use it. Make sure you know that the clouds need to cover over, so there'll be brilliant diffusers getting bouncing light everywhere, making everybody look beautiful and not harsh and squinty. Make sure you have their backs to the sun, and if you can, fill them with some fill light. Get like a speed light or something like that, or a flash, or a mono light if you're that good. Now you have to understand exactly what you're doing and what atmosphere you're going to be in, and then you'll know exactly what you need to do, so the situational thing is not necessarily deterring from these 5 tips that I'm going to give you. So you have to know your environment. Then you have to preset your camera. Now these are not part of the 5 tips that I'm giving you, but I'm letting you know exactly what you need to do. Now this is a side note. I'm using a new audio recorder. This is the Zoom L4, and if I'm picking up extra audio from anything humming, forgive me, I am testing it out today. So don't let me know in the comments that you can hear something humming or anything like that. It was really sensitive, and I'm trying to learn the levels. Back to the video. But yeah, you have to preset your camera. Understand, based off of what you studied about the environment and thought about in the environment, if, say for example, you're outside in the sunlight, well, chances are you're going to have a high shutter speed, or either that or a high aperture, because this is going to mitigate and actually bring the exposure into a manageable range. Some people used to say back in the day the sunny 16 rule. Having your aperture at f16 will give that sun a more controlled look in your image. It will be controlled so you can actually get a decent image off it, and everything won't be just white, or the background won't be just white, or your subject won't just be overexposed. So you start at f16 and adjust from there. All of these things are guidelines, much like these 5 tips that I'm going to give you today. So these guidelines still play a pivotal part in photography, things like the sunny 16 rule. So when I get into my 5 things, you'll actually understand why I'm giving you these rules, and they're not just rules, or they're not so much rules, but they're more so guidelines, helping you get to where you need to get. Like I said, I cannot tell you guys exactly what the exposure is, and a lot of things nowadays are so automated that you think that everybody can give you the exact answer, just like your camera can. All these auto modes, creative auto, auto this, auto that, auto that. Now, auto has its place. I'm not going to say it doesn't. Like, for example, me, I use manual mode, but auto ISO, because there's no way in the world that anybody can actually, with all the situations that I'm in, figure out every single accurate exposure. I just need the camera to come into a ballpark, and ISO is the only setting that I like to flex in, and I'm going to explain that more in my 5 tips. Now you have to think about multi ways you can expose for your image. Now, for example, if you have another light to provide to the fray, if you can bring another light source in, you can actually do so much more with your exposure than just relying on the natural settings that it gives you outside. So, for example, if you're doing a birthday party and you're outside and you can flash somebody, you can use high-speed sync. You can use rear curtain sync in some situations. If you're outside at night, you can get nice flowing line trails. You can also get high-speed sync from a flash, a high-quality flash, or a monolight like the Flashpoint Explorer 600, and then you can get the sun at a nice, reasonable shutter speed, like a 1/1000th, 1/4000th of a second when it's really daylight and bright outside, and then you can get your actual model or subject in a nice light provided by your speed light or your mono light that you have, that's very, very powerful to help you compete with the sun, giving you a more professional and more worthy look. Chances are, if you have a camera, you want a more professional, more worthy look, and you want to impress people. Now, with all that being said, those are only a few little things that you need to understand before you get into these 5 tips that I'm going to give you. Now, the first tip that I have on my list is to shoot raw. And I know I give you guys a lot of flack about JPEG being good and what it's good for in my recent videos, but raw is pivotal to getting the best image that you want and getting the best out of your settings that you're shooting in, whether it be aperture priority, shutter priority, manual program, whatever you're shooting in, shoot raw, because this is going to save you in post. You're going to be able to bring your highlights and your shadow up and your highlights down, all this other stuff, to bring that image into context where your camera might have failed, where your sharpness might have not been as sharp as you wanted it to be because your lens is maybe overshrouded by glare from the sun or anything strobes from the inside. If you're in a theater, you can actually use the dehaze and contrast and all these other things in Lightroom and Photoshop to actually save a picture that probably was going to be bad in the first place. And then you want to expose for maximum light. This is tip number 2. Expose for maximum light, because if you expose for maximum light, you'll get the most out of the camera. You might be saying, wait, hold on, Devin. What do you mean by expose for maximum light? I need your camera to have the best settings you possibly can. That means if you don't have enough light in the situation that you need to bring your shutter speed down, or be on a tripod so you can ramp your shutter speed down to get to the image that you want. Now, if you're taking a picture of a moving subject, that means you need to provide more light, because you're not going to be able to shoot fast enough to get them in a still type of motion. Or say, for example, if you have your shutter speed and your aperture the way you want it to be, then maybe change your ISO to get it exactly the way you want it to be, to give you no noise, things of that nature. But we'll get into ISO in just a second. Now, use the best lens for the situation. And you might be saying, well, what does lens have to do with my actual camera settings? Well, it means everything to your camera settings, because you know that thing aperture is probably one of the most important things on your camera. It's probably one of the most important settings in the exposure triangle. Why? Because the camera is a light receiving device. If the camera is a light receiving device, that means you need to have as much light coming through that camera, not only as much light as you possibly can, but controlled light. Now, the more controlled light you can offer that camera, the better the image will resolve, the better you can see the image. And what's the point in getting a high resolution camera like a 77D or a 5DSR or A7R Mark IV if you can't see the image and your camera has to struggle and provide noise instead of image quality and color to actually reveal the image to you? So my thing is, you need to get a lens that will open wide enough, your f2.8, your f1.8, your f1.4, even 1.2, depending on what situation you're in, and if you know how to use it, to give you that light through your camera so you can actually get the most out of your camera. And then the next tip will be to shoot at the lowest ISO possible. Now, some of the newer cameras can shoot as low as ISO 64 and ISO 50. Now, you need to understand what your native ISO is for your camera, whether it be 100, 64, or 50. Now, ISO 64 and 50 usually are not native ISOs, especially for Canon, because Canon doesn't do a lot of ISO improvement and dynamic range improvement, especially on the smaller end bodies, because I don't know, the sensors are not as big as the Nikon sensors or the Sony sensors or any other smaller APS-C size sensor on the market. So you have to go to the lowest ISO. The lowest ISO will provide you with the cleanest image and well, I'm not gonna say no noise. There's still some noise gonna be there, but the most minimal noise in the world. You might be saying, well, why would ISO do this for me? Why would that ISO setting provide me with such good image quality? Well, you have to understand what ISO is. Now, ISO stands for International Standardization Organization, or International Organization for Standardization, whatever you want to call it. But basically, it's a generic value that almost every camera has to basically give a meter reading to gain. Now, this gain is amplification. And if you've ever used a radio or any kind of stereo and you turned it all the way up and cranked it because, especially young folks, we love to crank our music. So the more you cranked it, you notice that it doesn't sound as good as it once did. And I'm not talking about volume or decibel wise. I'm just talking about the quality of the audio. Maybe your speakers started to blow. Maybe they started to sound tinny or distorted. Well, that's exactly what it's doing on the camera. The more you raise your ISO, the worse your image is going to look. Now, it's going to give you more light. And maybe you can't see the noise right off, but the more you raise it, the more noise you're going to get. Do an experiment if you don't believe me. Shoot at, say for example, 1/60 or whatever settings you get on auto mode. Shoot at it. And then go to manual mode. Use those same settings, but actually ramp your ISO up and compensate for it with another setting. For example, if you're doing good at ISO 64, or if you're doing good at ISO 100, raise that ISO up to its max and go to 12,800, whatever it is, and then maybe even put it on some kind of semi-automatic mode like shutter priority or aperture priority. You don't even have to put it on manual mode. Just let your camera compensate for the rest of the settings itself and just ramp your ISO all the way up and cap it off and see exactly how much noise you're going to get in your shadows and things of that nature. So ISO means a whole bunch when it comes to getting the best settings for your camera. As a matter of fact, I try my best to find ISO 100 or the lowest ISO possible when I'm shooting almost anything. That's how important it is to actually making the best settings or getting the best settings for your camera. And the last one, and last but not least, I told you guys you had an option of shutter priority or aperture priority or program or auto, but really guys, you need to be shooting in manual. And this is why I say at the beginning, I preface this whole video by telling you guys you have to study your environment. If you study your environment, you can even cheat it. You can even go to auto mode. Go to your environment before things happen. Go to auto, see what auto is talking about, and then take those settings to manual and fine tune and adjust there. It'll be way better than just shooting in all or full auto or creative auto or program, because you start to understand more about your camera, what it's doing, how to get the best out of it, what it's doing, how it's making a mistake, and what you want. And what's the point of buying a $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $6,000 camera and not knowing what you want and not knowing how to get it on a moment's notice? I'm done with CenturyFX Studios. Thanks for watching this video, guys. These are my 5 tips. Shoot in manual, lowest ISO, expose for maximum light, get the best lens for the job, and shoot raw. All of these will get you the best image possible with the best settings possible. And with you shooting raw, you can go in post and tweak it to the way you want it. Stay tuned and keep clicking those cameras, guys.